Hey there, sleepy wasteland wanderers. Tonight, we're diving into the haunting beauty of the Fallout universe, where broken cities whisper forgotten stories, and every shadow hides a tale of survival. I'll be your guide through these glowing ruins, sharing quiet moments of hope, resilience, and the eerie calm of a world long gone. Welcome, fellow wanderer of the long dark, to the question the Mojave keeps asking without answering, the one that lives in the glow of the strip's lights visible from every direction across the flat dark of the desert. In the face, on every screen, in the Lucky 38, in the voice that knows more about you than you expected and wants something specific from you in return. Tonight we ask whether Mr. House is actually the villain of his own story, and we ask it seriously, with the full weight of everything the honest examination requires. So settle in, let the desert settle around you, close your eyes when you are ready, and let the question find you gently. It will still be here when we are done. Robert Edwin House was born in 2020, and the specific fact of what he was born into, the specific combination of circumstances that organized the earliest years of his life and that produced, through the specific mechanism of early loss and specific institutional betrayal, the specific person who would eventually build Robco Industries and predict the Great War and survive it in the specific form that his survival took, is a fact whose importance for understanding what Mr. House is and why he is what he is exceeds the importance that the adult House's own account of his history tends to assign to it. House speaks of himself in the language of self-creation and exceptional capability, of the self-made man, whose achievements derive from his own intelligence and his own will, rather than from the specific circumstances that shaped the application of that intelligence and the direction of that will. This is not simply false. The intelligence was real, the will was real, the achievements were genuinely his, in the sense that his specific capabilities were essential to their production. But it is incomplete in the specific way that all self-made narratives are incomplete, in the way that, attending to the specific experiences that made the person who made the achievements, tends to reveal dimensions of the achievement's character and the achiever's motivation that the self-made framing manages away from direct acknowledgement. House's parents died when he was young. The specific character of this loss, its timing in his development, the specific form that parental loss at an early age takes in organizing a person's relationship to trust and security, and the reliability of the people and institutions around them, is a loss whose implications for the specific person House became are not difficult to read in the specific person House became, even if the reading requires more attention to the biographical record than House's own preferred framing of his history invites. After his parents' death, the management of the inheritance they had left him, the resources that should have provided the foundation of his subsequent development, and that represented the most concrete expression of his parents' care for him across the cess. Years they had not lived to occupy was assumed by his half-brothers, who subsequently and systematically stripped that inheritance away, leaving him with the specific combination of exceptional capability and institutional dispossession that organized the first chapter of his adult life. This was not simply bad luck. It was the specific and deliberate betrayal of a specific trust by the specific people who should have been the institutional expression of the care that his dead parents could no longer directly provide. The half-brothers, who took what was House's, represent the specific form of personal, institutional betrayal, the use of the authority that a relationship of care is supposed to provide to serve the interests of the authority holder rather than the person the authority was supposed to protect. That the adult House's entire subsequent architecture of self-sufficiency and system design can be read as a sustained response to the deep suspicion of depending on any arrangement whose continuation required the good faith of other people, the specific orientation toward trust and toward institutional relationships that characterizes House's pre-war and post-war behavior across every dimension of his canonical record, is not a personality quirk or a philosophical position arrived at through abstract reasoning about human nature. It is the specific response of a specific person to a specific and formative experience of what happens when the good faith of other people, on which a critical arrangement depends, is not maintained. House learned early and specifically that arrangements that depended on other people's good faith were arrangements whose continuation was not within his control, and the subsequent decades of his life were organized around the project of building alternatives to such arrangements, systems that he designed and controlled, and that would therefore function according to their design rather than according to whatever the people within them chose to do, with the trust of the arrangements required of them. Robco Industries was the first and the most comprehensive expression of this project at the institutional scale. And what House built at Robco deserves attention as something more significant than simply the successful technology company whose founder became very wealthy that the surface account would suggest. House founded Robco and built it into one of the pre-war world's most consequential technology corporations, the company whose products became so thoroughly integrated into the pre-war civilization's infrastructure that their presence in the post-war wasteland, 2 centuries after the company's operational existence ended, is simply the residue of how completely the pre-war world had organized itself around what House had built. The Pip-Boy personal computing devices that became the standard personal information management tool for the pre-war world's various institutions. The Protectron robotic labor force, whose deployment across industrial and commercial environments represented one of the most significant transitions in the pre-war labor landscape. The broader range of consumer and industrial technologies that bore the Robco name and that constituted a substantial portion of the technological infrastructure that the pre-war civilization depended on for its specific level, functional sophistication. What House was building at Robco was not simply a portfolio of profitable products organized around the maximization of shareholder value in the conventional corporate sense. He was building infrastructure, the specific forms of technological capability, whose presence throughout a civilization's operational environment becomes the condition on which the civilization's function at a specific level of sophistication depends, and whose absence or degradation represents not simply a commercial opportunity lost, but a reduction in the civilization's actual capability. House understood what he was building in this specific and broader sense, and the investment of his intelligence and his resources and his time in building it reflected a specific understanding of what technological infrastructure was for, of what it meant for a civilization to have it, and what it would mean for a civilization to lose it. This understanding was not simply strategic positioning for competitive advantage. It was the expression of a genuine vision of what civilization required and what he was specifically positioned to provide. And the specific character of what he built reflected this genuine vision alongside whatever self-interest the building also served. The prediction that House made about the Great War's timing is, alongside the survival of Las Vegas, the single most important fact about House's pre-war existence for understanding what the post-war House is and what the honest assessment of his villainy or its absence requires engaging with. The prediction was not a vague awareness that nuclear conflict was possible or even probable, the kind of general assessment that any informed observer of the pre-war world's political dynamics could have arrived at without any particular analytical sophistication. It was a specific probabilistic assessment, derived from House's mathematical modeling of the pre-war world's various political and strategic dynamics, whose specific precision about the timing of the conflict was sufficient to organize a specific program of preparation with a specific timeline, whose execution would determine what the post-war House would have available to work with. House believed the Great War would occur within a specific window of time, and he organized the final years of his pre-war existence around preparations whose design reflected the specific confidence his modeling had given him in that window's accuracy. The preparations House made on the basis of his prediction were extensive and were organized around a specific and coherent understanding of what needed to be preserved and what capabilities needed to be maintained across the conflict's aftermath. The defensive system for the Las Vegas metropolitan area, the network of surface-to-air missile batteries, and the Securitron robot army, whose operational capability House intended to bring to bear against the incoming warheads, was the preparation whose execution most directly determined what the post-war landscape of the Mojave would look like. House's plan was to intercept the incoming missiles with sufficient effectiveness to protect the city's physical infrastructure from the direct strikes that had destroyed the pre-war world's other major urban centers, and the specific technical requirement that stood between the plan and its full execution was the Platinum chip, whose programming updates for the Securitron operating system would bring the Army to its intended level of functional capability. The chip was completed. It was en route to House when the bombs fell. It arrived 27 hours too late for the Securitron update to be applied before the missiles struck, and the defensive system that House had spent his pre-war years and resources building was deployed at a fraction of its intended effectiveness. The partial success of the reduced Securitron force against the incoming missiles was sufficient to protect most of Las Vegas's physical infrastructure from direct strikes, and the specific result of this partial success is the most visible and most consequential single fact about the post-war Mojave: the survival of an intact urban environment in a landscape otherwise characterized by ruin. This achievement was real, and its significance for the subsequent 2 centuries of the Mojave's history was real, and the honest assessment of House's contribution to whatever good the post-war Mojave contains cannot responsibly avoid acknowledging the specific and extraordinary character of what his preparation made possible. But the specific character of the preparation's partial failure, the 27 hours that separated the full success from the partial one, the specific damage that the missile's House's reduced forces failed to intercept, inflicted on the city's outskirts and on the population that had not reached adequate shelter, is also part of the honest account of what House's pre-war preparation actually produced. And the gap between what was achieved and what was planned for is itself evidence about the specific limits of even the most extraordinary individual capability. When applied to the specific and unforgiving dynamics of the catastrophic events that the pre-war world had been building toward, the life extension technology that House had developed through Robco's research capabilities and that he applied to his own situation in the period immediately preceding the Great War is the specific and irreversible choice whose implications for understanding what the post-war House is, for understanding the specific form of the entity that the Courier encounters in the Lucky 38, are implications that the honest engagement with the villain question requires attending to with the care they deserve. House's survival across the 2 centuries since the Great War is not the survival of a biological person who has been extended through pharmaceutical or regenerative means. It is the survival of a consciousness that has been transferred from the biological substrate of the body that housed it through the first decades of House's life into an interface with the computing infrastructure of the Lucky 38, a connection that allows House to interact with the systems of the casino and through the casino with the broader infrastructure of the Mojave, but that has replaced the specific forms of embodied human experience and human limitation that previously organized his existence with something whose relationship to those forms is genuinely uncertain. What this means for House's humanity, for the specific forms of human engagement and human connection and human vulnerability that had previously been features of his existence, and that the transfer to the machine has altered in ways whose full character neither House's own account nor the canonical record more broadly is positioned to specify with confidence, is a question that the honest engagement with his character requires holding rather than dismissing or resolving prematurely in either direction. The House maintains that he is still essentially himself, that the consciousness that inhabits the Lucky 38 systems is continuous with and identical to the consciousness that inhabited the biological body before the transfer, and that the specific goals and values and patterns of thought that organized the pre-war house's existence continue to organize the post-war entity's existence without fundamental disruption. This claim is not simply impossible, and the canonical record provides no direct evidence that definitively contradicts it. But it is also a claim whose honest assessment requires acknowledging the specific difficulty of evaluating the continuity of a consciousness across a transfer of the kind that House underwent, and the specific ways in which the conditions of post-war House's existence, the centuries of isolation, the specific form of his engagement with the world, mediated entirely through screens and systems, rather than through embodied presence, might have shaped whatever consciousness continues in the Lucky 38 in ways that the pre-war House could not have anticipated, and that the post-war House might not be positioned to accurately assess. What House actually wants is the question that the honest engagement with whether he is the villain requires answering before any of the other questions can be adequately addressed. Because the assessment of the methods and the costs and the specific harms and specific achievements that the subsequent sections will examine is an assessment whose meaning depends entirely on what those methods and costs and harms, achievements are in service of. A person who does harmful things in service of genuinely good ends is a different kind of moral problem from a person who does harmful things in service of nothing beyond their own power and comfort. And the difference matters, not because it excuses the harmful things, but because it determines what the honest moral accounting of the full situation requires, and what questions the accounting most urgently needs to answer. House's stated vision is sophisticated and internally coherent and genuinely serious in its engagement with the questions it claims to be answering, and the honest assessment of whether he is the villain cannot responsibly dismiss that vision before examining it with the care its specific content deserves. The content of House's vision, stated in its most fully developed form across the various conversations the courier can have with him in the Lucky 38 and in the terminal records and observational evidence that the broader New Vegas environment preserves, is a vision organized around a specific and serious answer to the question of what humanity needs to survive across the scale of time that genuinely matters, rather than simply the scale of time that the immediate demands of wasteland survival tend to make most visible. House is not primarily interested in the next decade or the next generation. He is interested in the centuries beyond the next generation, in the question of what organizational and technological conditions humanity needs to establish in the relatively near term to ensure that the species is not simply surviving, but is positioned to pursue the expansion and the diversification that the genuine long-term security of any biological species requires. His answer to this question is the answer that his specific combination of intelligence, technological background, and 2 centuries of observation of the post-war world has produced, and it is an answer whose specific content reflects a genuine engagement with the question, rather than simply a rationalization for the power he happens to want. The centerpiece of House's long-term vision is the project of space colonization, the establishment of human presence beyond a single planet, as the specific response to the specific vulnerability that a single planet species faces, regardless of how sophisticated its civilization becomes or how effectively it manages the challenges of terrestrial existence. House is explicit about this objective in his canonical dialogues, and his explicitness about it is itself informative about the specific character of the vision. It is not the kind of objective that a person motivated primarily by personal power would be likely to articulate as the justification for that power, because the scale of the objective and the timescale of its achievement are both so large as to make its connection to the personal power's immediate benefits genuinely indirect. House would not live to see the space colonization program's completion, even with his life extension technology, at least not in any form that could be specified with confidence, and the specific sacrifice of present goods in service of that distant objective that his program requires is a sacrifice whose logic is better explained by genuine investment in the objective than by simple self-interest in the power the objective's pursuit currently provides. The specific path that House believes leads from the Mojave's current situation to the space colonization future, he envisions runs through a sequence of steps whose specific character reflects his assessment of what the available resources and the available constraints make possible in the relevant time frame. The first step is the stabilization of New Vegas's political situation, the defeat of Caesar's legion at Hoover Dam, the prevention of NCR annexation of the Mojave, and the establishment of House's independent governance as the dominant political reality of the region. The second step is the economic development that stable political conditions make possible the continued operation of the Strip's casino economy, the gradual expansion of manufacturing and industrial capability in the region, and the accumulation of the economic surplus that technological development requires as its material foundation. The third step is the technological development that the economic surplus funds the rebuilding of the scientific and engineering infrastructure that the Great War destroyed, the systematic recovery and extension of the pre-war technological knowledge base, and the eventual development of the specific capabilities that space travel requires. Each step depends on the previous ones, and the entire sequence depends on the political stability that House's victory at Hoover Dam and his suppression of competing claims on the Mojave's governance would provide. House's assessment of the NCR as an obstacle to this vision is not simply the competitive hostility of a political actor toward a rival for the same territory, though it contains that dimension. It is a specific philosophical and practical critique of what the NCR represents as a model of post-war political development, and the specific content of that critique deserves honest examination rather than simple dismissal as self-serving rationalization. House's argument against the NCR's suitability as the vehicle for the human future he envisions has several distinct components whose honest assessment requires engaging with each separately rather than treating them as a single, undifferentiated position. The first component is the institutional critique. House's argument that the NCR has reproduced the specific institutional pathologies of the pre-war democratic state rather than genuinely improving on them, and that the bureaucratic expansion and the political corruption and the gap between stated values and operational behavior that characterize the NCR's institutional reality represent not the promise of democratic governance, but its specific failure modes. This critique is not simply wrong. The NCR's canonical record in the Mojave provides genuine evidence for some version of it, the corruption of figures like Ambassador Crocker's predecessors, the specific failures of the NCR's military to adequately support its civilian commitments in the region, the specific ways that the NCR's presence in the Mojave has served the interests of NCR citizens and NCR institutional actors at the expense of the Mojave's existing communities, and the honest engagement with the critique requires acknowledging its evidential basis rather than dismissing it as simply House projecting his own power interests onto the NCR's institutional character. The second component of House's critique of the NCR is the practical critique, his argument that NCR annexation of the Mojave would redirect the region's economic output toward the NCR's existing institutional commitments and the expansion of the NCR's bureaucratic apparatus, rather than toward the technological development that House's vision requires. This is a more directly self-serving argument than the institutional critique, because the economic output that House claims the NCR would redirect is the same economic output that House's own program depends on, and that would also be redirected away from House's program by NCR annexation. But the self-serving character of the argument does not automatically make it wrong. The NCR's track record in the territories it has annexed provides some basis for the assessment that its governance tends to consume economic surplus in institutional overhead and political accommodation rather than directing it toward the kind of sustained technological development that House's vision requires, and the honest assessment of the argument requires acknowledging this evidential basis alongside the acknowledgement that House's stake in the conclusion makes the argument's honest evaluation more difficult. The third component of House's critique is the most fundamental and the most difficult to evaluate. Honestly, his argument that democratic governance, as such, is not the appropriate model for the specific phase of post-war development that the human future requires, and that the specific form of directed and accountable to no one authority that his own position represents is better suited to the specific demands of this phase than any form of government that requires the ongoing consent and participation of the governed. This is the component of House's position that is most clearly self-serving in the most direct sense, because it is the component that justifies not just House's specific decisions, but the specific structure of authority that makes those decisions his alone to make. It is also the component that deserves the most serious and the most skeptical engagement, because the history of claims that specific circumstances justify specific departures from democratic accountability is a history whose honest assessment does not straightforwardly support the claims, even when the circumstances are genuinely unusual and the individual making the claim is genuinely intelligent and genuinely well-intentioned. House's vision for what the Mojave would look like under his continued direction is articulated with enough specificity in his canonical dialogues to permit a fairly clear assessment of what he intends and what he believes his intentions would produce for the people living in the region whose future he is planning. He envisions a new Vegas that is gradually expanding its manufacturing and technological capabilities, a strip whose economic activity is generating the surplus that funds this expansion, a Mojave whose communities are benefiting from the stability and the increasing prosperity that his governance provides, and a broader trajectory that leads eventually toward the technological achievements that his long-term vision requires. The specific question of whether this vision is achievable from the specific position House occupies, whether the particular combination of capabilities and resources and constraints that constitute House's actual situation is sufficient to produce the outcomes his vision projects, is a question whose honest answer requires more uncertainty than House's own confident articulation of the vision suggests. But it is not a question whose honest answer is simply no. Whether House's stated vision is a genuine motivation for his choices, or a philosophical frame for what is ultimately an instrumental calculation about his own power and his own survival, is the most important single question about the power, vision's character, and it is also the question that the available evidence most stubbornly resists answering with the confidence that either a simple yes or a simple no would require. The evidence that the vision is genuine includes the pre-war record of House's behavior, the specific investments he made, the specific sacrifices of more immediately profitable alternatives in service of longer-term objectives, the specific pattern of choices that is more consistent with genuine investment in a long-term goal than with simple, short-term power maximization. It also includes the specific character of the vision itself, its scale, its time frame, its organization around objectives whose achievement House himself might not survive to witness, which is more consistent with genuine conviction than with the rationalization of immediately self-serving goals. The evidence that the vision is instrumental includes the specific ways that what the vision requires always happens to align perfectly with what House's own position requires. The specific accountability-free structure of authority that the vision's pursuit happens to require and the specific ways that the people whose welfare the vision claims to be organized around are consistently treated as means to the vision's achievement, rather than as the ends the vision claims they are. The honest position on this question is that the available evidence supports neither confident attribution of genuine vision nor confident attribution of purely instrumental calculation, and that the specific combination of intelligence and isolation and 2 centuries of machine-mediated existence that characterizes the post-war house creates a person whose own self-understanding may not be fully reliable as a guide to the question of whether his stated vision is the genuine motivation for his choices or a sophisticated rationalization for what is ultimately a much simpler orientation toward power and survival. House believes he genuinely cares about the human future. The canonical record does not provide the kind of access to the inner life that would permit confident confirmation or disconfirmation of this belief. What it provides is a person whose behavior is consistent with both possibilities and whose specific situation makes the distinction between them genuinely difficult to maintain with confidence, even from the inside. The strip that House built and maintains is the most visible and the most concentrated expression of what his governance of the Mojave has actually produced in the space between the vision he articulates and the conditions that his choices have created for the people whose lives his governance affects, and the honest examination of what the strip is and what it costs requires attending to both the genuine achievement it represents and the specific human costs of the arrangements that maintain it. The strip is extraordinary by any honest standard of comparison with the post-war world's other human settlements. It is an urban environment of genuine sophistication, lit, governed, commercially active, physically intact, offering a range and a quality of services whose availability in the wasteland is genuinely remarkable, and the specific fact of its existence in the post-war landscape is substantially attributable to House's pre-war preparation and to his 2 centuries of post-war management. This is a real contribution to a real good, and the honest assessment of the strip requires acknowledging it rather than treating the achievement as simply the backdrop for a critique of the costs. But the costs are real, and the honest assessment of the strip requires attending to them with the same directness that the acknowledgement of the achievement requires. The 3 families whose management of the strip's 3 major casinos House has organized the strip's administration around are families whose specific characters and specific histories raise specific and serious questions about what House has chosen to empower and what he has chosen to accept or ignore in service of the operational stability his arrangement provides. The Omertas, the family managing Gomorrah, the strip's most explicitly vice-oriented establishment, are an organization whose specific character is the character of organized crime, whose specific practices within and beyond the casino's walls include forms of exploitation and violence that are not incidental to their institutional identity, but constitutive of it. House's arrangement with the Omertas is an arrangement that requires knowing what the Omertas are and choosing to maintain the relationship rather than the alternative of accepting the costs of ending it. And the specific things that House knows about the Omertas and has chosen to tolerate are things whose knowledge and tolerance constitute a specific form of complicity in what the Omertas do with the authority the arrangement provides. Them, the Omertas' specific operations within Gomorrah, the prostitution whose specific conditions within the establishment are not the conditions of freely chosen labor, the drug commerce whose specific character includes the cultivation of dependency in the establishment's clientele as an element of the business model, the specific forms of exploitation that the power differential between the establishment and the people who enter it as workers or as customers makes available are operations that House is aware of in the general sense that a person managing the arrangement that enables them would necessarily be aware of, and his maintenance of the arrangement, despite this awareness, is a choice that reflects a specific assessment of what is acceptable in service of operational stability. This assessment is the specific form of the moral trade-off that House consistently makes the sacrifice of the welfare of specific people in specific situations, in service of the broader stability whose maintenance his vision requires, and the specific case of the Immerse is one of the more direct available expressions of what that trade-off looks like in its concrete form. The white glove society, the family managing the ultra-luxe, the Strip's most upscale and most culturally ambitious establishment, has a history whose specific character raises questions about House's standards for the relationships he is willing to maintain even more directly than the Immerse's character does. The society's pre-arrangement history, documented in the canonical record with enough specificity to constitute a clear account of what they were doing before House incorporated them into the Strip's management structure, includes cannibalism as a practice, the specific and comprehensive violation of the most basic available standards of human dignity toward the people who fell within the society's institutional reach during the period when their specific practices were organized around the consumption of human flesh. House's decision to offer the society a place in the Strip's management structure was a decision made with knowledge of this history, conditioned on the society's abandonment of the practice, and maintained on the assumption of their compliance with that condition. The canonical record raises questions about whether the compliance has been as complete as the condition required, and House's specific engagement with those questions. The degree to which his ongoing oversight of the arrangement has genuinely enforced as the condition he imposed is itself evidence about the specific character of the relationship to the human welfare his arrangement's conditions were supposed to protect. Freeside is the community that exists in the immediate shadow of the Strip's prosperity, and that has been most comprehensively excluded from the benefits that proximity to the Strip's extraordinary concentration of economic activity might otherwise be expected to provide. And the specific conditions of Freeside's existence are among the most direct available evidence about what House's governance of the Mojave actually means for the people who are not among the beneficiaries of his arrangements. Freeside is poor in the specific and comprehensive sense that post-war poverty takes inadequate food, inadequate medical care, inadequate physical safety, the specific vulnerability to exploitation and violence that material poverty always creates for the people who inhabit it. And its poverty is not simply the background condition of a harsh world that House's governance exists independently of and cannot reasonably be held responsible for. It is the specific and proximate consequence of choices that House has made about who gets to participate in the Strip's prosperity and what forms of connection between the Strip's extraordinary economic activity and the communities immediately surrounding it are permitted rather than restricted. The Securitron forces that enforce the boundary between the Strip and Freeside, that maintain the specific separation between the prosperity inside and the poverty outside through the credible threat of overwhelming force, are forces whose deployment in this specific function is a choice that House has made and continues to make, rather than a necessity imposed on him by circumstances beyond his control. The people of Freeside are not kept at bay by the natural barriers of desert geography or the physical limitations of the Strip's infrastructure. They are kept at bay by Securitrons that House directs, and the specific conditions of their exclusion from the Strip's prosperity are conditions that House's specific governance choices have produced and maintain. This does not mean that the Strip should simply be open to unlimited entry by the full population of the surrounding region, or that there is no legitimate case for managed access to an environment whose specific character requires management to sustain. It means that the specific form of the management, its specific exclusions, its specific beneficiaries, its specific costs for the specific people who bear them, is an expression of House's values and House's priorities, rather than simply the neutral operation of necessary limits. And the honest assessment of those values and priorities requires attending to what the management's specific form reveals about them. The water that flows from Hoover Dam is the most fundamental resource in the Mojave's political economy, and the specific question of how House's governance relates to the dam's output, who controls it, who benefits from its production, and what House's plans for its future involve, is a question whose honest examination is essential to understanding what the Strip's prosperity is built on and what its continuation would require. The dam's power currently supplies the Strip's extraordinary energy needs, and the Strip's extraordinary energy needs are part of what makes the Strip's extraordinary concentration of economic activity possible. And the specific relationship between House's control of the Strip and the dam's production is a relationship whose specific character is not incidental to the honest assessment of what House's governance means for the Willamette Mojave's people. Water and power from Hoover Dam are the material foundation on which everything that the Strip represents has been built, and the specific arrangements that govern their distribution, the specific communities that have access to them, and the specific communities that do not, are arrangements that House's governance has shaped and continues to shape in ways whose consequences for the Mojave's various communities are among the most concrete and most significant expressions of what his vision actually means in practice for the people who live within its reach. The Securitron Army is the most direct and the most literal expression of the specific form that House's power takes and the specific mechanism by which his governance of the Mojave is maintained. And the honest examination of what the Securitron force is and what it represents for the honest assessment of House's character requires attending to both its functional role in House's arrangements and its implications for the specific nature of the authority that those arrangements express. The Securitrons are machines, sophisticated, House-designed, House-directed machines whose operational parameters and whose deployment decisions are determined entirely by House's will, without the intervention of any other human judgment or any form of oversight that exists independently of House's own assessment of what the situation requires. This is not incidental to their role in House's governance, but constitutive of it. The Securitrons are the specific instrument through which House's will is enforced in the physical world, and their specific character as instruments of a single intelligence whose decisions are not subject to review or constraint by any external authority is the specific character of the authority that House's governance of the Mojave represents in its most concentrated and most unambiguous form. The platinum chip, whose delivery was the courier's initial mission, is the specific technical key to the transformation of the Securitron force from its current level of capability to the level that House has been planning toward since the pre-war period, and the specific character of what the upgraded Securitrons would represent the specific increase in House's capacity to enforce his will across a broader range of situations and against a broader range of potential opponents, is itself significant evidence about the relationship between House's vision and the force required to implement it. House presents the upgrade as a technical completion of something he designed before the war and has been working towards since, and this presentation is accurate as far as it goes. But the specific capabilities the upgrade provides, the more sophisticated weapons systems, the enhanced operational intelligence, the increased capacity for large-scale coordinated action against organized opposition, are capabilities that represent a qualitative shift in the specific nature of what House can do to the people and the institutions that stand between his plans and their execution, and the honest assessment of the upgrade's significance requires acknowledging this qualitative shift alongside the acknowledgement of its technical continuity with House's pre-war planning. House's relationship to consent and popular will is perhaps the most fundamental question about the nature of his authority, and the most honest answer to it is an answer that House himself would not dispute in most of its components. Even though he would dispute the specific weight, the answer's implications should be given in the assessment of his governance. House does not derive his authority from anything resembling the consent of the governed in any meaningful sense. The people of the Mojave, the residents of Freeside, the communities of the broader region, even the families who manage the Strip's casinos, have not been asked whether they want House to govern them, and have not been given the specific mechanisms through which they could express a preference against his governance that would have any effect on whether it continues. The Securitrons that maintain the specific boundaries of his arrangements are not there to protect a freely chosen social contract. They are there to enforce an arrangement that House has designed and that benefits from the arrangement's continuation, regardless of what the people within it prefer. House's response to this characterization, and it is a response he makes explicitly in his canonical dialogues, is that the question of consent is the wrong question to ask in the specific conditions of the post-war world, that the population of the Mojave is not in a position to make an informed choice about governance arrangements whose long-term implications exceed what any individual or community without House's specific knowledge and analytical capability can adequately assess, and that the specific form of authority he exercises is the appropriate form for the specific phase of development the human future requires, rather than an illegitimate imposition on a population whose preferences have been overridden. This response deserves honest engagement rather than simple dismissal, because the specific conditions of the post-war world do raise genuine questions about the adequacy of ordinary democratic governance frameworks for the challenges that post-war reconstruction involves. And because House's specific knowledge and analytical capability are genuine rather than simply claimed. But the honest engagement with the response also requires acknowledging that the claim that specific circumstances justify specific departures from accountability to the governed is a claim that has been made in every political context, where power has been concentrated without constraint, that the specific circumstances that are cited as justification for the departure always have features that make them seem genuinely exceptional to the person making the claim, and that the history of such claims and the history of what the unaccountable authority they justify has actually produced for the people over whom it is exercised is not a history that straightforwardly supports the claims, even when the circumstances are genuinely unusual and the person making them is genuinely intelligent. The New California Republic is the most important comparative reference point for the honest assessment of whether Mr. House is actually the villain, because it is the alternative to House's governance that the canonical record documents with the most specificity, and that the Mojave's actual political situation makes most immediately relevant to the question of what House's authority costs and what its absence or replacement would produce. The comparison matters not as an abstract exercise in political theory, but as the most concrete available answer to the question that the honest assessment of House's villainy or its absence most urgently requires: the question of what the people of the Mojave would actually have instead of House if House were removed from the equation, and whether what they would have is better or worse for the specific people whose welfare the assessment is ultimately organized around. The NCR is a genuinely complex political entity whose honest characterization requires holding simultaneously the genuine achievements it represents and the genuine failures that its operational reality in the Mojave documents, without allowing either the achievements or the failures to simply overwhelm the other in the specific way that both House's partisans and the NCR's admirers have tended to allow. The Republic's genuine achievements are real and significant and deserve acknowledgement before the examination of its failures, because the acknowledgement is required by the honest engagement rather than by the obligation to balance criticism with praise. The NCR has established functioning democratic institutions across a substantial territory of the former Western United States institutions, with genuine elections, genuine representation of constituent interests, genuine rule of law whose application is more consistent and more protective of individual rights than any alternative available in the post-war world, and a genuine civilian culture whose relationship to the institutions of governance reflects the specific and valuable inheritance of the pre-war democratic tradition whose preservation the Republic has taken seriously. These are genuine achievements whose value is not reduced by the failures that exist alongside them, and the honest assessment of the NCR requires treating them as genuine rather than as simply the ideological justification for an institutional project whose operational reality consistently betrays its stated values. The NCR's institutional failures are equally real and are documented in the canonical record with enough specificity to constitute a serious indictment of the gap between the Republic's stated commitments and its operational behavior, particularly in the Mojave region, where the combination of geographic distance from the Republic's core territories and the specific pressures of the Hoover Dam campaign have created conditions particularly favorable to the expression of the Republic's characteristic failure modes. Corruption is the most visible of these failures in the Mojave context. The specific and documented corruption of NCR officials, whose behavior in the region reflects the specific institutional tendency of governmental bureaucracies, operating far from their centers of accountability to develop the relationship to local power and local resources that serves the immediate interests of the officials involved rather than the stated interests of the institution they represent. The corruption is not simply the bad behavior of individual bad actors who have inserted themselves into an otherwise sound institutional framework. It is the expression of an institutional culture that the specific conditions of the NCR's expansion into the Mojave have allowed to express itself in the specific forms that geographic distance and institutional complexity together tend to generate. The military situation in the Mojave is perhaps the most directly damaging piece of evidence about the NCR's operational reality relative to its stated commitments. The Republic has committed its military forces to the defense of the Mojave region and to the protection of the civilian population that has settled there under the expectation of NCR protection. And the specific character of what that commitment has actually provided, the supply difficulties, the logistical failures, the specific situations in which NCR civilians have been exposed to threats that the NCR military's operational reality has left it unable to adequately address, is evidence about the specific gap between the Republic's institutional promises and its institutional capacity that the honest assessment of what NCR annexation would mean for the Mojave cannot ignore. The NCR is asking the Mojave's people to accept its governance on the basis of what it promises rather than what it has demonstrated. And the specific character of what it has demonstrated in the years of its presence in the region is not straightforwardly reassuring about what the promises would look like when translated into operational reality at the scale the annexation would require. The specific communities in the Mojave that have experienced the most direct and the most sustained contact with NCR institutions and NCR personnel provide some of the most concrete available evidence about what NCR governance actually means in practice for the people who live within its reach. The Freeside settlers, whose presence in the region reflects the broader NCR population's movement into the Mojave ahead of the formal institutional expansion, have experienced a relationship with the Republic that is more complicated and less simply beneficial than the idealized account of NCR governance would suggest, a relationship whose specific character reflects the specific ways that the gap between the NCR's stated values and its operational priorities manifests for the specific people who are most dependent on the Republic's institutional commitments, while being least positioned to extract the institutional attention that those commitments nominally require. The honest assessment of what NCR annexation of the Mojave would mean requires taking the specific experience of these communities seriously, rather than treating the Republic's stated values as a reliable guide to its operational behavior. What House offers as an alternative to NCR annexation is a form of governance whose specific advantages and specific costs the preceding section has begun to examine. But the honest comparison requires attending to the specific dimensions in which House's governance genuinely compares favorably with what the NCR offers, rather than simply noting that both have failures and leaving the comparison at that level of abstraction. The most concrete of these genuine advantages is the specific quality of order that House's Securitron force maintains within the territory he controls, and the specific consistency with which that order is applied regardless of the specific political pressures and the specific corruption opportunities that tend to degrade the NCR's law enforcement consistency. House's Securitrons do not take bribes. They do not form the specific relationships with local power that tend to redirect the application of law enforcement toward the interests of the powerful rather than the interests of the law's nominal beneficiaries. They enforce the rules that House has established with the mechanical consistency of machines whose operational parameters are not subject to the specific human tendencies that produce the NCR's characteristic failures. This is a genuine advantage for the specific people within House's territory whose welfare depends on the consistent application of something resembling rule of law, and the honest assessment of the comparison requires acknowledging it. The specific economic conditions that House's governance produces for the people within his territory also compare favorably with the NCR's economic record in the Mojave in specific and concrete ways. The Strip's economic activity generates a specific and significant flow of resources into the broader Mojave economy, whose character and whose scale the NCR's more bureaucratically mediated economic management has not and would likely not reproduce, and the specific communities within House's operational orbit that benefit from this economic flow are communities whose material conditions are better for the benefit than they would be without it. This is not a comprehensive vindication of House's economic governance. The specific exclusions and the specific concentrations of benefit that his economic arrangements produce are real, and their costs for the excluded communities are real, but it is a genuine advantage whose honest acknowledgement is required by the fair comparison with the NCR alternative. The specific dimension in which NCR governance would most genuinely improve on House's governance for the Mojave's people is the dimension of institutional accountability, the specific mechanisms through which the people, whose lives are affected by governance decisions, can challenge those decisions, demand explanations for them, and participate in the processes that produce them. House provides none of these mechanisms and has no intention of providing them. The NCR provides imperfect versions of all of them, imperfect because the Republic's institutional reality consistently falls short of its stated democratic commitments, but genuinely present in forms that have genuine effects on the specific governance decisions that the presence of accountability mechanisms tends to constrain. The specific value of these mechanisms for the Mojave's people is not simply theoretical or ideological. It is the practical value of having some institutional capacity to push back against the specific governance failures that any governance structure will generate over time. And the honest comparison between House and the NCR requires acknowledging that the NCR's imperfect accountability mechanisms provide something genuinely valuable that House's governance does not and will not provide. The honest assessment of the NCR comparison does not resolve cleanly in either direction, and the specific form of the honest position is the acknowledgement that both House's governance and the NCR alternative have genuine advantages and genuine failures for the Mojave's people, that the comparison of those advantages and failures does not produce a simple verdict in favor of either option, and that the specific choices the courier makes about this comparison in the course of the New Vegas narrative are choices between genuinely complex options rather than between a clearly good option and a clearly bad one. This is not the resolution that the question implies as a possibility when it asks whether House is actually the villain, but it is the resolution that the honest engagement with the full complexity of the comparison actually produces. Caesar's Legion is the darker mirror in the comparison that House's situation requires engaging with, and the specific character of what the Legion represents for the Mojave's people is in certain respects more directly and more comprehensively negative than anything that the NCR comparison produces on either side. The Legion is an institution whose specific achievements are real and whose specific horrors are real, and the honest assessment of it as a comparative reference point for evaluating House's governance requires taking both seriously rather than allowing the obvious magnitude of the horrors to simply overwhelm the examination of the past achievements, because the achievements are part of what makes the Legion genuinely dangerous as a political competitor rather than simply a collection of particularly brutal raiders with organizational pretensions. Caesar's Legion has achieved the specific form of territorial stability and road safety within its controlled territories that the wastelands' independent communities rarely achieve without the institutional infrastructure that the Legion provides. The roads within Legion territory are safe for travel in ways that roads through comparable independent wasteland territory are typically not, and the specific value of this safety for the people who travel them and for the economic activity that travel enables is a genuine value rather than simply Legion propaganda. The specific mechanisms through which the Legion achieves this safety are mechanisms of deterrence through extreme violence against those who threaten the order the Legion enforces, and the specific costs of those mechanisms for the people who fall within their reach as subjects of enforcement rather than beneficiaries of protection are costs that are enormous and real and not adequately captured by the simple observation that the roads are safe. But the roads being safe is also real, and the honest engagement with what the Legion offers as a comparative reference point for House's governance requires acknowledging the reality alongside the horror, rather than treating the horror as simply cancelling the reality out. The Legion's specific horrors are extensive and are documented in the canonical record with enough specificity to constitute a comprehensive account of what the institution's governance means for the people most directly subject to its authority rather than its protection. Slavery is foundational to the Legion's institutional structure in a way that is not incidental to its other characteristics, but constitutive of them, the specific economic and military functions that slaves perform within the physis. Legion's territorial organization are functions whose performance the Legion's military capacity depends on, and whose availability the Legion's expansion campaigns are substantially organized around producing. The specific treatment of women within the Legion's social organization is a treatment whose character reflects the specific institutional values that Caesar's reading of Roman historical precedent has produced, values that assign women a role defined entirely by their reproductive utility and their domestic labor, rather than by any dimension of their individual capabilities or preferences. The specific violence with which the Legion enforces its authority against conquered peoples, the specific forms of public punishment, the specific demonstrations of what resistance and disobedience produce is violence whose character reflects a deliberate institutional choice to use the most extreme available expressions of force as the primary mechanism of social control rather than a regrettable byproduct of other institutional priorities. House's specific opposition to the Legion is one of the more revealing dimensions of his character, because the specific form it takes, the combination of strategic self-interest and genuine philosophical contempt, a combination whose specific character is more consistent with the honest attribution of genuine values than a purely strategic opposition would be. House does not simply oppose the Legion because the Legion threatens his position, though it does threaten his position. He opposes the Legion because he genuinely regards what the Legion represents as an affront to the specific vision of human progress that organizes his understanding of what the human future requires. And his articulation of this opposition in the canonical dialogues reflects a genuine engagement with what the Legion actually is and what it actually means for the human future, rather than simply the competitive hostility of a political rival. The Legion's specific combination of brutal effectiveness and fundamental atavism, its capacity to impose order through violence, and its organization around social arrangements that represent genuine regression from the prouder, pre-war world's most significant achievements, is exactly the combination that House's vision of the human future identifies as the specific enemy of what the future requires, and the specific vehemence of his opposition reflects this identification. What a Legion victory at the Second Battle of Hoover Dam would actually mean for the Mojave's communities is the most concrete available evidence about the Legion alternative, and the canonical record provides enough specificity about what the Legion does in territories it conquers to permit a fairly clear assessment of what the Mojave's people would face in the event of that victory. The specific communities within the Mojave that have managed to sustain something approaching normal human life, the independent settlements, the existing social structures, the specific cultural forms that 2 centuries of post-war adaptation have produced, would face the specific disruption that Legion conquest consistently visits on the communities it absorbs. Some of those communities' members would be enslaved. Others would be incorporated into the Legion's administrative structure on terms determined entirely by Caesar's assessment of their utility to the Legion's institutional requirements. The specific individuals whose capabilities or whose resources make them valuable to the Legion would find their situation transformed into one organized around the Legion's extraction of that value. The specific individuals whose capabilities or resources the Legion has no use for would find their situation transformed into one whose terms are set entirely by what the Legion's conquest has left available for them to inhabit. House's specific response to the Legion threat his opposition to the Legion's victory at Hoover Dam, his deployment of the Securitron force against the Legion's military operations in the region, his cultivation of the alliances that the New Vegas narrative documents him developing and attempting to develop in service of the defensive requirement that the Legion's presence creates, is a response whose strategic self-interest and genuine philosophical opposition are genuinely difficult to separate in the specific form that the response takes. House needs the Legion to lose because a Legion victory would end his control of the Mojave and likely end his existence. He also believes the Legion needs to lose because what the Legion would do to the Mojave and to the broader human future is genuinely worse than what House's continued governance would produce for the same territories and the same populations. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and the honest assessment of what House's opposition to the Legion reveals about his character requires holding both rather than allowing either to simply displace the other in the accounting. The specific question of whether House's governance is actually worse than the Legion's for the Mojave's people is a question whose honest answer is sufficiently clear to state directly, it is not. The specific forms of harm that House's governance produces for the Mojave's people, the poverty of Freeside, the exploitation enabled by the casino arrangements, the accountability-free authority of a single intelligence whose decisions affect everyone and can be challenged by no one, are real harms whose cost for the specific people who bear them is real. They are not the cost of slavery and the cost of conquest, and the cost of the systematic degradation of human beings to the status of institutional resources that the Legion's governance produces. The comparison that makes House look best is the comparison with the Legion, and the honest acknowledgement of this is important because the comparison's asymmetry is a genuine piece of evidence about House's specific position in the moral landscape of the Mojave, rather than simply an observation designed to make him look better than he actually is. The courier's specific relationship to House is the most direct available evidence about what House's engagement with individual human beings who matter to his plans actually looks like. And the specific character of that evidence is evidence about dimensions of House's character and House's specific form of engagement with the people around him, that the broader account of his Mojave governance does not always make fully visible. The relationship begins with the courier's delivery of the platinum chip, a mission whose specific assignment to the courier, rather than to any of the many other available agents within House's operational reach, reflects a specific assessment on House's part about what the courier represents in terms of capability and what the chip's safe delivery requires in terms of the agent assigned to ensure it. House had been watching for a courier with the specific combination of capabilities that the courier displays, and the specific character of his preparation for the encounter, that the chip's delivery would produce the depth of the information he had assembled about the courier before the meeting. The specific form of the proposition he had prepared to offer reflects a genuine assessment of the courier as a specific individual whose specific capabilities made them relevant to House's plans in a way that went beyond the simple instrumental function of delivering an object. What House wants from the courier is more and more interesting than simply the execution of specific tasks within his operational structure. He wants the courier to be his agent in the specific and more comprehensive sense of being the person who acts in the world on House's behalf in situations where House's direct operational capacity, his ability to observe and to direct through the Securitron network, is insufficient to the complexity and the subtlety that the situation requires. The courier's specific combination of combat capability, social adaptability, and the specific quality of judgment that their canonical role in the New Vegas narrative demonstrates is exactly the combination that House's operational structure lacks, and that the specific challenges of the pre-Battle of Hoover Dam period make most acutely necessary. House needs someone who can navigate the human dimensions of the Mojave's political situation in ways that Securitrons cannot, and the courier represents the specific form of that need's potential satisfaction that House's observation had identified and his preparation had organized itself around. The specific things House asks the courier to do in the service of his plan, the engagement with the various factions whose cooperation or neutralization the plan requires, the specific investigations and interventions and negotiations that the Mojave's pre-battle political situation demands, are requests whose character reflects a genuine recognition of the courier's specific capabilities and a genuine willingness to deploy those capabilities in service of objectives that House articulates, with enough transparency to permit genuine assessment rather than simply recruitment to purposes the courier cannot adequately evaluate. House does not tell the courier everything. The information asymmetry between them is real and significant, and reflects House's characteristic tendency to manage the information environment of the people he works with rather than simply sharing what he knows. But he tells the courier substantially more than most employers in the wasteland tell the people they employ, and the specific quality of what he shares, the genuine engagement with the Mojave's political situation, the honest articulation of what his plan involves and what its objectives are, reflects something closer to genuine respect for the courier as a person whose understanding matters to the relationship than the purely instrumental use of a capable tool would produce. The information asymmetry that characterizes House's relationship with the courier is itself significant evidence about the specific character of his engagement with individual human beings whose participation his plans require. House knows more about the courier than he reveals at any point in their canonical interaction, and the specific things he declines to share the full implications of the choices the courier is being asked to make, the specific ways that the courier's continued service to his plans would constrain the courier's own options, the specific character of what House's long-term vision would mean for the people who have helped him achieve it, are things whose withholding reflects the specific calculus of information management that House applies to, all of his relationships with people he needs, rather than the specific honesty that a relationship of genuine mutual respect between equals would require. This is not simply the normal information differential of an employer who knows more about the business context than an employee needs to know. It is the specific and deliberate maintenance of an asymmetry that serves House's interests in the relationship by preventing the courier from making a fully informed assessment of what the relationship involves and what its continuation would require. What happens if the courier refuses House's proposals is itself significant evidence about the nature of the relationship he is actually offering and the specific conditions under which the courier's continued participation is being solicited. House does not simply accept the courier's refusal as the legitimate exercise of an autonomous individual's preference about which relationships to enter. He treats refusal as a problem to be managed, and the specific forms of management available to him, the Securitron force, the specific leverage that his knowledge of the courier's situation provides, the various ways that his control of the strip's environment makes the courier's continued presence in the region contingent on his tolerance, are management tools whose availability reflects the specific character of the father, power differential in the relationship, and what that differential means for the nature of the consent of the relationship involves. The courier has genuine choices within the New Vegas narrative, and House's specific form of coercion is considerably less brutal and less comprehensive than the Legion's equivalent. But the presence of genuine choice in the sense of the ability to select among available options is not the same as the presence of genuine consent in the sense of a freely given agreement between parties whose options are not organized by the threat of the more powerful party's displeasure, and the honest assessment of what House's relationship with the courier involves requires acknowledging this distinction rather than treating the availability of choices as equivalent to the absence of coercion. The specific question of what the Mojave and its people would look like if House's plan succeeds fully if the upgraded Securitrons give him comprehensive military dominance of the region. The Battle of Hoover Dam produces the outcome his plan requires, and he is positioned as the Mojave's unchallenged political authority without significant external constraint, is a question whose honest answer requires more uncertainty than either House's optimistic account or his most critical assessor's pessimistic account would suggest. House's optimistic account projects a Mojave gradually improving under his direction. With the economic and technological development, his plan envisions steadily expanding the range of what is available to the people within his governance and the conditions under which they inhabit it. This account is not simply fantasy. The specific capabilities and the specific resources that House commands are genuinely significant, and the specific intelligence he brings to the management of complex systems is genuinely extraordinary. And the honest assessment of what those capabilities deployed in service of a genuine vision of human progress might produce requires acknowledging that the optimistic account is not without evidential support. But the optimistic account is also the account of a person assessing the likely consequences of their own unaccountable authority over other people's lives, and the specific history of how such assessments tend to relate to the actual consequences of such authority is not a history that straightforwardly supports the optimistic account, even when the individual making it is genuinely extraordinary in their capability and genuinely sincere in their stated intentions. The case against Mr. House is not adequately made by simply cataloguing the harms his governance produces and presenting the catalogue as the verdict, because the catalogue without the honest engagement with what the harms are in service of and what the alternatives to them would produce is not a moral argument, but simply a list whose weight cannot be assessed without the context honest moral argument requires. The case against House is something more specific and more coherent than a catalogue. It is the argument that the specific combination of what House does and what House is and what House's authority means for the people subject to It constitutes a form of wrong whose character is not adequately captured by any of the individual harms that comprise it, and whose full weight requires attending to the pattern rather than simply the instances. The boomers at Nellis Air Force Base are among the more instructive examples of the specific character of House's engagement with the communities whose cooperation his plans require, because the relationship he has cultivated with them is a relationship whose specific form reveals something important about how House thinks about the people he considers useful and what he considers an acceptable way to engage with. Communities whose specific capabilities he intends to deploy. The boomers are an insular and heavily armed community whose specific history, in their origin as a group of vault dwellers who emerged into a wasteland that consistently threatened and exploited them until their response of comprehensive violence against outsiders produced the specific isolation that now characterizes their social identity, has produced a community whose relationship to the outside world is organized entirely around the rejection and the active discouragement of contact. House has been cultivating a relationship with the boomers across the period of his post-war engagement with the Mojave, providing them with specific resources whose delivery is organized to serve the boomers' specific needs in ways that create a specific form of dependency without the boomers fully understanding the specific character of the relationship they are in or the specific purposes toward which the relationship is being directed. The boomers do not know that House has been cultivating them. They understand the specific resources that have reached them as the results of their own trading activities and the specific manifestations of their own self-sufficiency, rather than as elements of a deliberate program of engagement, designed by an external actor whose long-term intentions for the community include deploying their specific capabilities in service of his plan at a moment of his choosing. This is not simply the normal information differential of any relationship in which one party knows more about the broader context than the other. It is the specific and deliberate cultivation of a relationship in which the boomers' genuine investment in their own isolation and their genuine self-understanding as a community that has chosen separation from the outside world is being used to make them more rather than less useful to someone whose plan for their future involves bringing them into engagement with exactly the outside world. They have organized their entire social identity around rejecting. House is not simply taking advantage of an available resource. He is specifically shaping a community's development in ways the community does not understand and would not have consented to if it had understood them, in service of an objective that serves House's plan, rather than the community's own expressed preferences about its relationship to the world around it. The Brotherhood of Steel chapter in the Mojave represents the most directly disturbing single piece of evidence in the case against House, the specific decision he made about how to engage with an organization that represented a specific form of challenge to his arrangements, and what that decision reveals about the specific limits of House's tolerance for organized opposition and the specific methods he is willing to employ when the management of an obstacle moves beyond what accommodation or negotiation can address. The Brotherhood of Steel's presence in the Mojave constituted a specific and ongoing challenge to House's operational requirements. The Brotherhood's institutional commitment to the acquisition and control of advanced technology made their relationship to the Securitron Force and to the broader technological infrastructure of House's operations a relationship of potential competition rather than simply independent coexistence, and the Brotherhood's military capability made them a potential threat that the Securitron Force's current capacity could not address with the confidence the House's planning required. House's response to this situation was not the response of someone who had exhausted the alternatives of accommodation and reached reluctant conclusion that confrontation was unavoidable. It was the response of someone who assessed the Brotherhood as an obstacle rather than a potential partner and determined that the most efficient available management of the obstacle was its elimination. The elimination of the Mojave Brotherhood chapter, the specific military campaign against Hidden Valley that House directed and that the Securitrons executed, produced the death of people who had not personally done anything to House or to the specific people and communities whose welfare, House's governance, claims to be organized around serving. The Brotherhood's institutional character and institutional objectives made them a genuine obstacle to House's specific plans, and the honest assessment of this is important for the honest assessment of the case against House. But the transition from genuine obstacle to people who are killed for being obstacles is a transition whose moral weight is not eliminated by the genuineness of the obstacle, and the specific character of how House managed the transition, the absence of sustained good faith effort to find alternatives, the efficiency of the move from assessment of threat to execution of response is evidence about the specific value House assigns to human life when human life is in tension with his operational requirements. The value is not nothing, but it is not the primary consideration in the calculus, and the honest assessment of the case against House requires acknowledging what the Brotherhood's elimination reveals about where human life sits in the hierarchy of considerations that House's governance decisions reflect. The Kings and the broader Freeside community have already appeared in this account as evidence about the specific costs of House's economic arrangements for the people most comprehensively excluded from their benefits. But the specific relationship between House's governance choices and the conditions that Freeside's people inhabit deserves more direct examination as a component of the case against him than the earlier treatment provided. House has had the capability and the opportunity to extend something more than the current conditions to Freeside across the years of his post-war governance of the Mojave, and the specific choices he has made about the form that the Strip's relationship to its surrounding communities takes are choices whose specific character reveals something important about whose welfare his governance is actually organized around rather than whose welfare his stated vision claims to be organized around. The people of Freeside are the wasteland survivors whose existence in the immediate proximity of the Mojave's most concentrated expression of prosperity has not produced for them any meaningful participation in that prosperity, and the specific reasons for their exclusion from it are not reasons that House's governance has required him to maintain. They are reasons that House's governance has chosen to maintain because the specific form of the Strip's operation that House has designed does not require attending to the welfare of the people outside it in any way that the Securitron Force's capacity to maintain the boundary between inside and outside does not already provide. The human cost of the casino arrangements, the specific harms that the three families' operations visit on the specific individuals who fall within their institutional reach, is a cost whose accumulated weight across the force. Years of House's maintenance of the arrangements is a cost that belongs to House's governance record, rather than simply to the family's individual choices, because the families operate under arrangements that House designed and continues to maintain, and that he could alter or terminate if the cost of the alteration or termination were acceptable to him in relation to whatever operational benefits the arrangements provide. The person who is exploited within Gomorrah's specific operational practices is a person whose exploitation is enabled by an arrangement that House has made and that he continues to make every day that he maintains the arrangement, rather than replacing it with something whose terms would not permit the exploitation. The specific accumulation of these individual costs across the years of the arrangement's operation is not a number that can be calculated with confidence, but the honest acknowledgement that it is large and that it belongs to House's governance record is a requirement of the honest case against him. The accountability question is perhaps the most fundamental component of the case against House, and it is the component that remains most powerful even after the honest engagement with the genuine achievements and the genuine vision that the case for House requires acknowledging. House is not accountable to anyone for any decision he makes about the governance of the Mojave and the lives of the people within it. There is no mechanism through which the people affected by his decisions can challenge those decisions, demand explanations for them, or participate in any process that influences whether and how they continue. The Securitrons that enforce his arrangements are not there to protect a social contract whose terms the parties to it have agreed to. They are there to enforce arrangements whose terms House has set and will continue to set without reference to any consideration of what the people within those arrangements prefer or need that goes beyond House's own assessment of what their preferences and needs require in service of his broader plan. This is not simply a different form of governance whose specific character is appropriate to specific circumstances. It is the absence of accountability in a form that cannot be distinguished from the absence of accountability in any other context, and the honest case against House requires treating it as what it is, rather than as what House's specific circumstances and specific capabilities might seem to justify. The things that House has preserved deserve the honest acknowledgement that the case for him requires, and the honest acknowledgement begins with the most fundamental and the most extraordinary of his preservation achievements: the survival of Las Vegas's urban infrastructure in a form that constitutes a genuinely remarkable anomaly in the post-war world's landscape of ruin, and that has provided genuinely significant benefits to genuinely real people across the 2 centuries since the Great War ended the civilization that built it. What the survival of Las Vegas has meant for the Mojave's population is not a simple calculation of benefits that can be totaled against costs and compared with some counterfactual in which the survival had not occurred. It is the specific and comprehensive fact of an urban environment whose existence has organized the specific form of the Mojave's post-war development in ways that have no parallel elsewhere in the wasteland, and that reflect specific character of what an intact urban center provides for the human communities in its vicinity. The specific things that the Strip's continued operation provides for the Mojave's economy are things that deserve honest acknowledgement as genuine contributions to the welfare of real people, rather than dismissal as simply the byproduct of House's self-interest in maintaining the economic activity his plans depend on. The caps that flow through the Strip's casino economy are caps that circulate through the broader Mojave economy in ways that fund the specific forms of commercial activity: the traders, the crafters, the service providers, the various economic actors whose livelihoods depend on the availability of the economic activity that the Strip's concentration of wealth makes possible, whose existence is better for the Mojave's communities than their absence would be. The employment that the Strip and its associated industries provide for the Mojave's population, including the population of the communities outside the Strip, whose members find work within its operational structure, is employment whose specific character is better than the alternatives available in most of the wasteland's economic environment. The specific services, medical, commercial, informational, that the Strip's concentration of resources makes available to the people in its vicinity are services whose quality and availability exceed what the communities without equivalent concentrations of resources can provide for themselves, and the specific people whose lives are better for having access to those services are people whose welfare is genuinely served by the Strip's continued operation. House's genuine intelligence and its specific value for the Mojave's governance is something that the honest case for him requires acknowledging, without the embarrassment that the acknowledgement of a powerful person's genuine capability sometimes produces in assessors who are concerned that the acknowledgement will seem like endorsement of the power. House is genuinely and extraordinarily intelligent in the specific sense of possessing exceptional analytical capability that he has applied for 2 centuries to the specific problem of understanding and managing the Mojave's complex political and economic dynamics, and the specific things he understands about the wasteland's operation that the alternatives to his governance do not understand with comparable depth and precision, are things whose value for the Mojave's population is not simply the value of House's self-interested decisions, but the value of genuinely better informed decisions about genuinely complex problems. The specific ways that House's understanding of the Mojave's dynamics has prevented specific harms, the specific threats he has managed before they reached the point where their management required more costly interventions, the specific opportunities for cooperation and development that his understanding has identified and pursued before the alternatives would have recognized them, are harms prevented and opportunities pursued that belong to the honest case for House's governance alongside the harms his governance has produced. The things that House has prevented, the specific harms, whose non-occurrence is attributable to the specific character of his governance, rather than simply to the general absence of the specific conditions that would have produced them, are genuinely difficult to enumerate with the confidence that a comprehensive accounting would require, because the prevention of harms is by definition the non-occurrence of things whose occurrence would have been visible, while their prevention leaves no comparable trace. But the specific evidence available in the canonical record of the Mojave's political situation, the specific threats that House's management has addressed before they reached critical expression, the specific stability that his governance of the Strip has provided against the various forces that would have disrupted it in his absence, supports the honest acknowledgement that House's governance has prevented specific harms for specific people that the absence of his governance would not have prevented, and that these prevented harms belong to the honest assessment of his record alongside the harms he has produced. The 200-year plan evaluated honestly is something more complex than either House's confident articulation of its achievability or his critics' dismissal of it as megalomaniacal fantasy suggests. And the honest assessment requires holding the genuine force of both the confidence and the skepticism, rather than allowing either to simply overwhelm the other. The plan is internally coherent. The sequence of steps from political stabilization, through economic development, through technological reconstruction, through space colonization, reflects a genuine understanding of what each phase requires from the previous one, and the specific resources and specific capabilities that House commands are not simply insufficient to the plan's requirements in a way that makes the plan simply impossible to take seriously. At the same time, the plan assumes a continuity of political and economic conditions across a timescale of centuries that the wasteland's history does not straightforwardly support as a reasonable expectation, and the specific risks, the fragility of the systems that House's continued operation depends on, the specific threats that his plan's success requires successfully navigating, the specific ways that 2 centuries of unanticipated developments have already demonstrated the limits of even the most extraordinary individual planning against the complexity of real historical dynamics, are risks whose honest acknowledgement requires more uncertainty about the plan's achievability than House's own account of it tends to express. The question of whether Mr. House is actually the villain is the question that this account has been building toward answering across the full span of the examination the preceding sections have conducted. And the honest answer to it requires the kind of direct engagement with what the evidence actually supports, rather than the evasion of a comfortable conclusion that the question's genuine complexity might seem to invite. The question's specific form, not whether House has done harmful things, which the evidence clearly supports, but whether he is actually the villain, is a question about the category rather than simply about the content of the assessment. And the honest engagement with what the category requires, and whether House's specific situation meets those requirements, is where the examination's accumulated evidence most directly bears. The villain category, in the form that makes it a meaningful moral designation rather than simply a narrative convenience, requires a specific combination of things whose presence or absence in House's situation the examination has developed enough evidence to assess honestly. It requires harmful intent or harmful indifference, the specific orientation toward the welfare of others that produces harm not as the regrettable byproduct of other pursuits, but as either the goal or the acceptable cost of. Achieving goals to which other people's welfare is genuinely subordinated. It requires the availability of better alternatives, the specific condition that the harm being done is not the unavoidable consequence of the available options, but the chosen consequence of the specific choices the person has made, from among a range of options that included better ones. And it requires a specific relationship between the person's choices and the harms they produce that is not mediated by the kind of genuine uncertainty and genuine complexity that makes the attribution of moral responsibility for harmful outcomes genuinely contested rather than simply convenient to deny. The strongest honest case that House is the villain proceeds from the accountability dimension of his governance, more than from any of the specific harms that his choices have produced. Because the accountability dimension is the dimension that is most cleanly and most directly House's specific responsibility, rather than the product of the complex mix of House's choices and the wasteland's conditions that the other harms reflect. House has organized his governance around the specific removal of any mechanism through which the people whose lives his choices affect can challenge those choices. And this specific organizational choice is a choice for which no genuinely compelling justification is available that does not ultimately reduce to the claim that House knows better than the people he governs what is good for them, and that this knowledge is sufficient justification for removing their capacity to disagree with him in any way that has effect. The claim may be true in the specific sense that House does know more than most of the people he governs about the specific dynamics of the situation they collectively inhabit. But the specific history of what unaccountable authority produces when applied to the governance of people whose welfare the authority holder claims to be serving, regardless of the specific quality of the spority people. Authority holders' knowledge, or the specific sincerity of their stated commitment to the governed population's welfare, is a history that does not support the claim that the knowledge and the sincerity are sufficient substitutes for the accountability mechanisms whose absence defines House's governance. The villain case rests most heavily on this specific foundation, not on what House has done, but on what his governance structure makes it possible for him to do without any check that is not internal to his own judgment. The strongest honest case that House is not the villain proceeds from the comparative dimension of the assessment, from the honest acknowledgement that the alternatives to House's governance in the specific context of the Gru's Mojave's actual political situation are not the idealized alternatives of accountable democratic governance operating effectively in service of the population's genuine interests, but the actually available alternatives of NCR annexation with its specific failures and Legion conquest with its specific horrors and independent fragmentation with its specific vulnerabilities. Against these actually available alternatives, rather than the idealized alternative of genuinely good governance, House's specific combination of genuine achievement and genuine harm produces a comparative record that is not simply the villain's record. The survival of Las Vegas, the maintenance of the Strip's economic activity, the specific stability of the region against the specific threats that the available alternatives have not demonstrated the capacity to address. Effectively, these are genuine contributions to the welfare of real people that the deeper, honest case against House cannot simply dismiss, and the comparative assessment of House's governance against the actually available alternatives, rather than an idealized standard, produces a verdict that is more ambiguous than the villain designation implies. The honest position on the question of whether Mr. House is actually the villain is the position that the full examination has earned, the position that holds the genuine force of both the case against and the case for, without allowing either to simply resolve the question in the direction that would make it more comfortable to hold. House is not simply a villain in the sense that the category's conventional application implies the person whose harmful choices are driven by harmful intent and whose situation admits of better alternatives that genuine moral commitment would require pursuing. He is not simply not a villain in the sense that the absence of the designation implies the person whose choices, whatever their costs, are genuinely organized around the welfare of the people they affect and whose authority is exercised with the specific humility that the uncertainty of his knowledge and the fallibility of his judgment would require of someone genuinely committed to the welfare of others rather than to the specific form of the future he has decided others should have. What House actually is the specific moral category that the honest engagement with the full complexity of his situation and his choices produces is something that the villain designation is genuinely inadequate to describe, and the inadequacy is not evasion, but precision. He is a specific kind of moral problem that the post-apocalyptic condition generates with a specific and uncomfortable consistency, the problem of the person whose genuine capability and genuine vision produce genuine goods for real people in genuinely bad conditions, while also producing specific harms through specific choices, whose costs are borne by people who had no say in the making of those choices, and no recourse when the costs proved heavier than the person making the choices assessed them to be. The wasteland generates this problem in various forms and at various scales, and the honest engagement with it requires the specific intellectual honesty of declining to resolve it into the comfortable simplicity that a verdict of villain or not villain would provide. What the honest difficulty of the Mr. House question reveals about the wasteland's broader moral landscape is something that extends beyond the specific assessment of House's specific situation into the broader questions about what the wasteland's conditions make possible and what they make impossible for the people attempting to make moral sense of the world they inhabit. The wasteland does not provide the conditions under which the most demanding forms of moral assessment can be straightforwardly applied without the constant friction of the gap between what the moral standards require and what the actual situation makes available as options. The people making choices in the Mojave, including the courier, whose specific choices about House and the alternatives to House constitute the most direct available expression of what the honest assessment of the question ultimately requires, are people making choices among options whose full complexity of the honest engagement with what the wasteland is and what it demands of the people within it requires acknowledging rather than simplifying into the comfortable categories that make the choices feel more straightforward than they actually are. The case against Mr. House is not adequately made by simply cataloguing the harms his governance produces and presenting the catalogue as the verdict, because the catalogue, without the honest engagement with what the harms are in service of and what the alternatives to them would produce, is not a moral argument, but simply a list whose weight cannot be assessed without the context honest moral argument requires. The case against House is something more specific and more coherent than a catalogue. It is the argument that the specific combination of what House does and what House is and what House's authority means for the people subject to it constitutes a form of wrong whose character is not adequately captured by any of the individual harms that comprise it, and whose full weight requires attending to the pattern rather than simply the instances. The pattern is the pattern of a governance that treats the people within it primarily as resources for the achievement of objectives that their welfare is claimed to serve, but that their participation in determining has never been solicited, and whose costs they are required to bear without the specific form of institutional recourse that would allow them to contest the bearing. The boomers at Nellis Air Force Base are among the more instructive examples of the specific character of House's engagement with the communities whose cooperation his plans require, because the relationship he has cultivated with them is a relationship whose specific form reveals something important about how House thinks about the people he considers useful and what he considers an acceptable way to engage with. Communities whose specific capabilities he intends to deploy at a moment of his choosing. The boomers are an insular and heavily armed community whose specific history of their origin as a group of vault dwellers who emerged into a wasteland that consistently threatened and exploited them until their response of comprehensive violence against outsiders produced the specific isolation that now characterizes their social identity, has produced a community whose relationship to the outside world is organized entirely around the rejection and the active discouragement of contact with anyone and anything that does not belong to the specific social world they have constructed within their isolation. They are, by any honest assessment, a community whose specific character reflects the specific damage that the wasteland's treatment of vulnerable people consistently produces. A community that learned through direct and repeated experience that the outside world was dangerous, and that the most reliable protection against its specific dangers was the maintenance of a perimeter enforced by the kind of overwhelming firepower that makes the calculation about whether to threaten them an easy calculation for anyone with access to the relevant information. House has been cultivating a relationship with the boomers across the years of his post-war engagement with the Mojave, providing them with specific resources whose delivery is organized to serve the boomers' specific needs in ways that create a specific form of dependency without the boomers fully understanding the specific character of the boomers, the relationship they are in, or the specific purposes toward which the relationship is being directed. The specific resources that have reached Nellis through channels whose ultimate origin in House's operational management the boomers have not been told to look for, have been reaching them in the specific form that meets the specific needs of a community whose self-sufficiency is the foundation of the identity that makes them worth cultivating for House's purposes, and the specific elegance of this arrangement, the cultivation of a resource in the form that makes the resource most effective, while preventing the resource from understanding that it is being cultivated, is an elegance that House's intelligence makes available to him in ways whose honest assessment reveals something specific and significant about the character of his engagement with the people whose participation his plans require. The boomers do not know that House has been cultivating them. They understand the specific resources that have reached them as the results of their own trading activities and the specific manifestations of their own self-sufficiency, rather than as elements of a deliberate program of engagement, designed by an external actor whose long-term intentions for the community include deploying their specific capabilities, including the specific and extraordinary capability of the restored B-29 bomber, whose presence at Nellis and whose potential operational use has been part of House's calculations in service of his plan at a moment of his choosing. The boomers' genuine investment in their own isolation and their genuine self-understanding as a community that has chosen separation from the outside world, the specific form of the identity whose maintenance their cooperation in House's plan would require them to revise, is not an identity that House's cultivation of them has respected as something that deserves genuine consideration in the planning. It is an identity that his cultivation has used to make them more, rather than less, useful to someone whose plan for their future involves bringing them into exactly the kind of engagement with the outside world they have organized their entire social life around rejecting. The specific moral dimension of House's engagement with the boomers that deserves the most direct acknowledgement is the dimension of what it means to shape a community's development and a community's relationship to the outside world without the community's knowledge or consent, in service of objectives that the community has not been invited to assess and would not necessarily endorse if the invitation were extended. House is not simply taking advantage of an available resource in the sense that the wasteland's various actors regularly take advantage of whatever the landscape and its communities offer in the way of exploitable opportunities. He is specifically and deliberately shaping a community's trajectory in ways whose ultimate expression is the community's deployment as an instrument of his plan, and the specific form of this shaping its invisibility to the community being shaped, its organization around the community's specific vulnerabilities and specific needs in ways that make the shaping most effective, precisely because the community does not recognize it, as shaping is a form of engagement whose honest characterization requires something stronger than the neutral language of strategic resource management. The Brotherhood of Steel chapter in the Mojave represents the most directly disturbing single piece of evidence in the case against House. the specific decision he made about how to engage with an organization that represented a specific form of challenge to his arrangements, and what that decision reveals about the specific limits of House's tolerance for organized opposition and the specific methods he is willing to employ when the management of an obstacle moves beyond what accommodation or negotiation can address. The Brotherhood of Steel's presence in the Mojave constituted a specific and ongoing challenge to House's operational requirements. Their institutional commitment to the acquisition and control of advanced technology made their relationship to the Securitron force and to the broader technological infrastructure of House's operations a relationship of potential competition rather than simply independent coexistence, and their military capability made them a potential threat that the Securitron force's current capacity could not address with the confidence House's planning required. House's response to this situation was not the response of someone who had exhausted the alternatives of accommodation and reached the reluctant conclusion that confrontation was unavoidable. It was the response of someone who assessed the Brotherhood as an obstacle rather than a potential partner, and determined that the most efficient, available management of the obstacle was its elimination before the obstacle's potential. For growth made its elimination more costly than it was at the time. House made the assessment. The specific campaign against Hidden Valley that House directed and that the Securitrons executed produced the death of people who had not personally done anything to House or to the specific people and communities whose welfare House's governance claims to be organized around serving. The Brotherhood's institutional character and institutional objectives made them a genuine obstacle to House's specific plans. And the honest assessment of this is important for understanding the context within which the decision was made, rather than simply the content of what the decision produced. But the context does not discharge the moral weight of the content, and the specific transition from genuine obstacle to people who are killed for being obstacles is a transition whose moral weight is not eliminated by the genuineness of the obstacle that prompted it. The specific character of how House managed the transition, the assessment, the decision, the execution, without the sustained good faith engagement with alternatives that the people being killed might have reasonably expected. From a governance authority whose claimed commitment to the human future requires taking human lives seriously as something more than variables in an operational calculus, is evidence about the specific value House assigns to human life when human life is in tension with his operational requirements. The value is not nothing, and the honest engagement with what the canonical record actually documents about House's relationship to the Brotherhood requires acknowledging that he did not destroy the Brotherhood casually or without calculation, but the calculation's specific character, its efficiency, its organization around what serves House's operational requirements, rather than around what the human cost of the available options requires, reveals something important about what the operational requirements mean to House and what the human cost means to him when the two are in tension. The Kings and the broader Freeside community have already appeared in this account as evidence about the specific costs of House's economic arrangements for the people most comprehensively excluded from their benefits. But the specific relationship between House's governance choices and the conditions that Freeside's people inhabit deserves more direct and more sustained examination as a component of the case against him than the earlier treatment provided. The people of Freeside exist in the immediate proximity of the most concentrated expression of material prosperity in the post-war world, in conditions of material poverty whose specific character inadequate food, inadequate medical care, inadequate physical safety from the violence that material poverty always generates in the specific social contexts where the wasteland produces it is the specific and direct consequence of governance choices that House has made and continues to make, rather than simply the neutral background condition of a harsh world that House's governance exists independently of. The boundary between the Strip's prosperity and Freeside's poverty is maintained by securitrons that House directs, and the specific character of that maintenance, its consistency, its comprehensiveness, its organization around the preservation of the Strip's specific economic arrangements at the cost of the surrounding community's access to any meaningful participation in those arrangements, is the specific expression of House's governance values in their most concrete and most daily form. The question of what House could do differently for Freeside, without unacceptably compromising the operational requirements that his broader plan depends on, is a question whose honest engagement reveals that the answer is not nothing. The specific exclusions that characterize Freeside's relationship to the Strip's economic activity are not the minimum necessary exclusions that the Strip's continued operation requires. They are the specific exclusions that House's specific assessment of the operational requirements has produced. And the honest assessment of that specific assessment requires acknowledging that different priorities or different values applied to the same operational situation would produce different exclusions with different costs for the Freeside community. House has chosen a specific form of the Strip's relationship to its surrounding communities, and the specific form he has chosen is not the only form available to someone with his capabilities and his resources. It is the form that his specific priorities and his specific values have produced, and the honest case against him requires treating it as the expression of those priorities and values, rather than as the unavoidable consequence of the operational situation. The accumulated human cost of the casino arrangements, the specific harms that the three families' operations visit on the specific individuals who fall within their institutional reach across the years of House's maintenance of the arrangements, is a cost that belongs to House's governance record in a form that requires direct acknowledgement rather than the indirect reference that treating the arrangements as simply the background conditions of the Strip's operation permits. Each person exploited within the specific operational practices of Gomorrah's establishment. Each person whose life is made worse by the specific things that the White Glove Society's history and the specific conditions of their incorporation into the Strip's management structure have enabled. Each person who falls into the specific forms of harm that the Immerse's institutional character produces, and that House's maintenance of the arrangement with them continues to make available. Each of these people is a person whose specific situation is specifically connected to choices that House has made and continues to make, and the specific accumulation of these individual situations across the years of the arrangement's operation is a form of harm whose attribution to House's governance record is not simply the application of an unreasonably strict standard to the inevitable costs of managing a complex environment. It is the honest acknowledgement of what governance means in the most literal sense, that the person who organizes and maintains the conditions within which specific harms occur bears a specific form of responsibility for those harms. That is not discharged by the observation that the people most directly producing the harms have their own moral agency and their own accountability. The accountability question is the most fundamental component of the case against House, and it is the component whose force persists most strongly, even after the honest engagement with everything in the case for him that genuinely deserves acknowledgement. House is not accountable to anyone for any decision he makes about the governance of the Mojave and the lives of the people within it. The specific meaning of this unaccountability in the context of the full assessment of his character is not simply the abstract concern of democratic theory about the formal properties of governance arrangements. It is the practical concern about what unaccountable authority produces over time for the people subject to it, and what the history of such authority in the canonical record and in the genuine historical parallels that the wastelands condition evokes provides in the way of evidence about how that production typically proceeds. The person who can make any decision about the lives of specific people without any mechanism through which those people can challenge the decision, demand its justification, or participate in the process that produces. It is a person whose specific decisions, whatever their specific quality in any given instance, are made in conditions that systematically favor the decision-makers' interests and the decision-makers' assessments over the interests and the assessments of the people whose lives the decisions affect. House's genuine intelligence and genuine commitment to a vision of human progress do not change this systematic feature of the conditions under which his decisions are made. They make it more, rather than less important, that the systematic feature be honestly acknowledged rather than treated as incidental to the assessment of his governance's character. The case for Mr. House begins, as the honest case for any governance authority must begin, with the most basic and the most concrete question about what the authority has actually produced for the actual people who have lived within its reach, not what it has promised or what its stated vision projects, but what the specific and measurable conditions of actual people's actual lives reveal about what the authority has meant for their welfare in the most immediate and the most direct terms available. And the most honest answer to this question, applied to House's governance of the Mojave across the 2 centuries of his post-war existence, is an answer that requires acknowledging genuine and significant goods produced for genuine and significant numbers of real people, alongside the genuine and significant costs that the preceding section has examined with equal honesty. The survival of Las Vegas is the starting point and the foundation of the honest case for House, and it deserves the sustained attention that its extraordinary character warrants, rather than the brief acknowledgement that its familiarity as a backdrop to the New Vegas narrative tends to produce in assessments that have moved quickly past its foundational significance to engage with the more contentious dimensions of House's record. Las Vegas survived because of specific choices that House made before the war, with the specific understanding of what was coming that his mathematical modeling had produced, and with the specific and extraordinary commitment of resources and effort that translating that understanding into defensive capability required. The survival is not simply the lucky outcome of geography or the natural resilience of a particular construction standard. It is the direct and specific consequence of what House did, and the people who have lived within the orbit of the city's survival across 2 centuries who have benefited from its economic activity, its physical infrastructure, its concentration of resources and services that no comparable post-war environment provides, are people whose lives are specifically and directly better for what House chose to do before the war than they would have been in the ruse. Counterfactual, where House had not made those choices. The specific character of what the Strip's survival has meant for the people of the Mojave is most visible when the comparison is made not with the idealized alternatives of genuinely good governance, but with the actual conditions that characterize the comparable post-war environments where the specific goods the Strip provides are absent. The settlements of the Mojave that exist outside the Strip's direct orbit, the communities whose access to the Strip's economic activity is mediated rather than direct, whose participation in the broader regional economy is organized around the Strip's existence as the economic anchor that it is, are communities whose material conditions, whatever their specific failures, are better than the conditions of comparable post-war communities in regions without equivalent economic anchors. The caravans that move through the Mojave carrying goods and information and the specific forms of economic connection that make regional economies more than collections of isolated subsistence settlements are caravans whose existence and data, whose viability depends substantially on the economic activity that the Strip generates and sustains, and the specific people who participate in those caravans and who benefit from the economic activity they facilitate are people whose lives are specifically better for the Strip's existence than they would be without it. The Mojave's relative political stability, the specific form of order that House's governance has maintained across the period of his post-war engagement with the region's political dynamics, is a stability whose specific value for the people within it is not simply the abstract value of orderly governance, but the concrete value of the specific harms that the absence of the stability would produce and that its presence has prevented. The specific threats that the Mojave's political environment has contained across the post-war period, the various actors and institutional forces whose ambitions and capabilities would, in the absence of House's specific form of stabilizing influence, have produced specific and significant additional harms. For specific people are threats whose management House's governance has contributed to in ways that the honest case for him requires acknowledging as genuine contributions, rather than simply the byproducts of self-interested power maintenance. House has not prevented all harms within his governance territory, and the preceding section has documented the significant harms that his governance has produced and enabled. But the harms he has prevented, however difficult they are to enumerate with confidence, are also part of the honest assessment, and the honest assessment requires making the effort to acknowledge them, even when the effort is difficult. The specific question of what the post-war Mojave's development trajectory would have looked like without House, without the specific survival of Las Vegas, without the specific economic activity of the Strip, without the specific form of political stability that House's post-war presence has contributed to the region, is a counterfactual question whose honest engagement requires genuine uncertainty about the answer, rather than the confident assertion that the counterfactual Mojave would have been better or worse in the comprehensive way that simple verdict-seeking tends to produce. The wastelands record of what happens to regions without the equivalent of House's specific combination of preserved infrastructure and sustained governance presence is not a record that supports confident optimism about the counterfactual. And the honest engagement with the case for House requires acknowledging this without treating it as a simple vindication of everything that House's governance has involved. The honest position on the question of whether Mr. House is actually the villain is the position that this account has been building toward through the full examination of the evidence that the preceding sections have developed. And it is a position whose specific character requires more precision than a simple verdict in either direction can provide. The examination has produced not a resolution, but a clarification, a more precise understanding of what the question actually is, and what the evidence actually supports about its answer. The clarification is this: House is a specific kind of moral problem that the post-apocalyptic condition generates with a consistency that the comfortable categories of villain and not villain are both inadequate to describe, and the honest engagement with his specific situation requires holding the full complexity of what the examination has revealed, rather than resolving it prematurely into the simpler form that a verdict would provide. The villain category requires harmful intent or harmful indifference, the availability of better alternatives, and a specific relationship between the person's choices and the harms they produce that is not adequately mediated by the genuine complexity of the situation. House's harmful choices are real and significant and have been examined honestly in this account. But House's harmful intent is not established by the evidence in the simple form that the villain designation typically implies. The evidence is more consistent with a person who is genuinely invested in a vision of human progress and who makes choices that produce specific harms as the cost of pursuing that vision, than with a person whose orientation toward the people around him is primarily harmful or indifferent. The availability of better alternatives is real in the specific dimensions where the examination has identified choices that House could make differently without unacceptable operational cost, and genuinely uncertain in the broader dimensions where the counterfactual conditions that better alternatives would require are not clearly available in the actual situation House inhabits. The relationship between his choices and the harms they produce is genuinely mediated by the complexity of the Mojave's political situation and the genuinely terrible character of the available alternatives in ways that the simple villain attribution does not adequately accommodate. The not villain designation requires that the person's choices, whatever their costs, are genuinely organized around the welfare of the people they affect, that the authority exercised is exercised with the humility that genuine uncertainty requires, and that the specific harms produced are the unavoidable costs of genuinely good objectives pursued through genuinely available means, rather than the chosen costs of objectives that could be pursued through less harmful means, or that are not as genuinely good as the person pursuing them believes. House's genuine care for the human future, to the extent that the evidence supports attributing genuine care rather than instrumental calculation, does not establish that the specific people whose welfare his governance most directly affects are the people around whose welfare his choices are actually organized. The humility that genuine uncertainty about one's own judgment requires is not a characteristic that House's governance expresses in any of its documented dimensions. And the specific harms that his governance produces are not straightforwardly established as the unavoidable costs of genuinely good objectives pursued through genuinely available means. The examination has identified specific dimensions in which different choices were available and were not made. What House actually is, on the evidence that the honest examination of his full record produces, is something that both designations are inadequate to capture, and that requires the more precise language of specific moral assessment, rather than the categorical language of villain or not villain. He is a person of extraordinary capability and genuine vision who has organized the expression of that capability and that vision around a specific form of unaccountable authority over other people's lives, and who has made specific choices within that authority that have produced genuine goods and genuine harms in a combination whose net assessment depends on the specific values and the specific comparative standards that the assessor brings to the examination. The honest acknowledgement of this is the most important conclusion the examination produces, not because it provides a comfortable resolution, but because it provides an accurate one. And the accurate account of what House is more valuable for the honest engagement with the wasteland's moral landscape than the comfortable account that the villain designation would provide in its place. The wasteland is full of people who produce genuine goods through methods that impose genuine costs on people who did not choose the methods. And the honest engagement with this specific and pervasive feature of the wasteland's moral landscape requires the specific intellectual honesty of declining to resolve every such person into the villain or the hero that the comfortable categories make available. House is the most fully developed expression of this specific challenge that the New Vegas narrative provides, and the specific discomfort that the honest engagement with his situation produces is not a failure of the engagement, but its achievement. The specific and accurate recognition that the challenge does not yield to the available categories without the loss of something essential about what the challenge actually is and what the honest engagement with it actually requires. Rest now, fellow wanderer of the long dark, and let the lights of the strip settle into the quiet distance, where questions that resist comfortable resolution find the restful form they take when the examination that produced them has been honest enough to earn the rest that follows. The question we have walked through tonight, whether Mr. House is actually the villain of his own story, of the Mojave story, of the specific human future he has organized his existence around, pursuing, is not a question that the honest examination resolves into the clean verdict that the question's form implies as a possibility. It is a question that the honest examination clarifies into something more useful than a verdict, which is a precise understanding of what the question actually is, and why it resists the resolution that would make it easier to carry. The man who built Robco Industries and predicted the Great War and survived it in the specific and irreversible form that his survival took is not simply a villain. The specific combination of what he preserved and what he built and what the 2 centuries of his post-war existence have produced for the specific people whose lives his governance has touched: the survival of Las Vegas, the maintenance of the Strip's extraordinary economic activity, the specific stability he has provided against the specific threats that the Mojave's actual political situation contains, is a combination whose honest assessment cannot be reduced to the villain's record without losing something essential about what the honest assessment requires. The person who sits in the lucky 38 and calculates the human future with a precision and a seriousness that the wasteland's other political actors do not match is not simply the villain whose power is the problem and whose removal is the solution. He is something more complicated than that, and the honest engagement with his specific situation requires holding the complication rather than resolving it prematurely. He is also not simply vindicated by the achievements and the vision and the genuine intelligence that the case for him assembles into an argument for his governance. The people of Freeside, who live in the immediate shadow of the prosperity he has built and maintained without being permitted to participate in it, are people whose specific situation is the specific expression of the specific choices House has made about whose welfare his governance is organized around serving, and those choices belong to the honest assessment of what he is, alongside the achievements that the same choices helped make possible. The Brotherhood of Steel soldiers who died in Hidden Valley because House determined that their institutional character made them an obstacle that removal was the appropriate response to, are people whose deaths belong to the honest assessment alongside the Strip's survival. The specific accountability that his governance provides to no one for any decision, the specific absence of any mechanism through which the people whose lives his choices affect can challenge those choices in any way that has effects, is an absence that the honest assessment cannot treat as simply the appropriate adaptation to the specific conditions of the post-war world, rather than as a specific and significant form of wrong that persists, regardless of the specific quality of the choices made within it. What House is, after the full examination has been conducted and the evidence has been assessed with the care it deserves, is the wasteland's most precise expression of a specific moral problem that the post-apocalyptic condition generates with a consistency and a specificity that the comfortable categories of villain and not villain are both inadequate to describe. He is the person whose genuine capability produces genuine goods for real people in genuinely terrible conditions, and whose specific choices in service of those genuine goods produce specific harms for specific people who had no say in the choices and no recourse when the harms proved larger than the chooser's assessment had anticipated. The wasteland generates this problem at every scale, from the smallest community's most local decisions about who benefits from what the community can provide and who bears the cost of maintaining what it has, to the largest political actors' decisions about the specific form of the future they intend to build and the specific people and the specific alternatives they are willing to sacrifice in the building of it. House is the most fully developed expression of this problem that the New Vegas narrative provides, and the specific discomfort that the honest engagement with his situation produces is the discomfort of recognizing that the problem does not yield to the available moral categories without remainder. The courier who stands in the lucky 38 and hears House's account of himself and his vision and his plan is a courier who is being asked to make a specific choice about a specific situation whose honest complexity this account has attempted to trace across the full span of the examination. The choice the courier makes about whether to support House, to work against him, to find the specific form of engagement with his situation that their own assessment of the evidence recommends, is a choice that the honest examination does not predetermine, because the honest examination produces not a verdict, but an understanding of what the choice is actually about and what the evidence actually supports. The courier's choice is the choice that every person in the wasteland is eventually required to make, in one form or another, the choice about how to engage with power that produces genuine goods through methods that impose genuine costs on people who did not choose the methods and cannot refuse the costs. There is no choice among the New Vegas narrative's available options that escapes this specific form of the problem. Every option has its specific combination of genuine goods and genuine costs and genuine accountability failures, and the honest engagement with the choice requires acknowledging this rather than treating any of the available options as the clean solution that the problem's resolution into a verdict of villain or not villain would imply. The lights of the Strip are still on in the Mojave Dark. They have been on for 2 centuries. Through everything that those 2 centuries have contained, the violence and the reconstruction and the various forms of human suffering and human persistence that the post-war world has organized itself around producing and surviving in the specific region where the lights burn. The lights are on because someone built them and someone maintains them, and the maintenance costs something that the brightness itself does not show, and that the people who benefit from the brightness do not always know they are paying. This is the specific and honest image of what House has built and what it means, and it is the image that the question of his villainy or its absence most honestly produces when the examination has been conducted with the care the question deserves. Sleep now, wanderer. The Lucky 38 rises over the Strip in the Mojave Dark, the face on its screens calculating the futures of people who have not been asked what futures they want. The Securitrons moving through the streets of the city that survived because someone decided it should survive, and had the specific and extraordinary combination of capability and obsession required to make the decision stick across 2 centuries of everything the wasteland could produce to undermine it. The question of whether this makes him the villain will still be here when you wake. It will be here for as long as the lights are on, which is to say, for as long as the man in the machine has the power to keep them burning, which is to say that the question and the lights are, in the most honest available sense, the same thing, the specific and enduring expression of a specific and enduring problem that the wasteland offers not a resolution to, but an occasion for the honest engagement that the problem deserves. Rest now. The desert holds the question in its patient and ancient dark, as it holds everything the wasteland contains without judgment, without resolution, with the specific and unhurried patience of something that has been here longer than the questions being asked of it, and that will remain when the asking has found whatever rest is available to it. Sleep, wanderer. The lights are on the horizon. The question is good company for the dark.